Chennedy Carter now with 12 points off the bench.
Chennedy Carter shoves Caitlin Clark to the floor. No ball, no play, no accident, just pure, deliberate, in-your-face aggression against the biggest star the WNBA has ever produced. The arena erupts. Some fans freeze, others erupt in fury. And Clark, flat on the hardwood, right in front of 20,000 people and a national television audience, takes a beat. Then she gets up, and what she does next is the reason this game gets remembered. Before the ball tipped, June 1st, 2024, Indiana Fever versus Chicago Sky, the first WNBA meeting between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. This game had been circled on calendars since the draft, since the moment both players were selected and placed in the same division, and everyone who follows women's basketball understood that every time these two franchises shared a court, the sport's biggest storyline would be at center court with it. But this game had a layer underneath the Clark-Reese headline that received less pregame attention and far more postgame scrutiny. Chennedy Carter, a veteran guard with a reputation for physical, confrontational play, coming off the bench for Chicago with something visibly personal behind her eyes from the opening tip. The energy inside the arena before the ball even moved was not the energy of a regular season game. It was split, tense, and almost expectant, as if everyone present understood that something was going to happen and was simply waiting for the moment to arrive. Chicago moved with an edge in their warm-ups. Their defensive assignments looked choreographed around making Clark uncomfortable from the first possession, rather than simply containing the Fever's offense as a whole. This was not subtle. The plan was legible. Clark read it and answered it the way she answers most things, by shooting. First quarter, Clark sets the table. Chicago struck first. A quick two-pointer in transition, trying to set an early tone of control. The crowd settled into it for approximately one possession. Then Clark pulled up from deep without hesitation and buried a three. No feeling out period, no adjustment time. She had assessed the defensive alignment, identified the space, and released before the defender could close. The arena exploded and the message was immediate. The intimidation strategy was not finding the target it was aimed at. Both teams went back and forth through the opening minutes, bucket for bucket, neither side conceding rhythm. But underneath the scoring exchange, the physicality was building. Little bumps becoming harder hits. Contact accumulating possession by possession. Chicago's defensive approach was designed to wear Clark down through attrition, make every catch difficult, make every drive a negotiation with a body in the way, make the game feel uncomfortable enough that it affected her decision-making. Clark's response was not to force the issue. Instead, she shifted into playmaker mode. One possession, she threaded a laser pass through traffic, a pass that required the passer to identify a window that was open for approximately half a second, and to deliver the ball through it with the precision of someone who had made this throw 1,000 times. The ball arrived. The bucket was scored. The crowd reacted not just to the points, but to the understanding that they were watching someone who could make the game look different from how everyone else made it look. 7 points in the first quarter. The points were not the story. The story was that nothing Chicago tried had produced even a visible change in Clark's composure. Indiana held a slim lead at the first break. 2 points, thin enough that the game remained entirely open. But the first 15 minutes had answered the most important early question. The physical strategy was not breaking Clark. It was not even bending her. Second quarter, Carter finds her rhythm. The second quarter introduced a specific variable that would define the game's most chaotic moments. Chennedy Carter, coming off the bench, began finding her rhythm. She was electric, fast, aggressive, attacking downhill before defenses could organize, finishing at the rim through contact. One play, she simply blew past Clark. No screen, no misdirection, just pure speed advantage exploited immediately, and finished easy at the basket. The kind of play that shifts energy in an arena because the crowd on both sides responds to speed, and Carter had it in abundance in those minutes. Chicago fed off her momentum. The slight Indiana lead began to feel less comfortable. The game tightened. Carter hit a jumper, then another. The scoreboard locked at 31, with both teams having spent the entire half playing at a physical intensity that left marks on both rosters. Clark continued orchestrating through the second quarter rather than simply scoring. A precise assist to Mitchell in the closing minutes kept Indiana in front. But the message from Chicago's bench was that Carter had arrived and the game was now operating at a different temperature than it had been in the first quarter. Indiana led by 2 at the half, the kind of lead that means nothing, the kind of lead that the second half would settle. Third quarter, the moment. The third quarter is where the game became something else entirely. Chicago came out hunting, not competing, hunting. Carter attacked Clark directly in the early third quarter possessions, searching for any indication that the physical accumulation was registering. It was not registering. Clark responded to each possession with the same precision she had shown in the first quarter, refusing to give the physicality the emotional response it was looking for. Then Carter scored, a drive to the rim, finished hard, and she erupted afterward. The specific energy of a player who has been building towards something all game and has now found the moment to express it. She stepped toward Clark. With 15 seconds left in the third quarter, Carter dribbled, drove, scored, and then, without a ball anywhere near the play, without any basketball justification, without anything resembling an accidental collision, she shoved Caitlin Clark to the floor. No ball, no play, no accident. Clark went flat to the hardwood. The sound it made moving through the arena was wrong. Not the sound of a basketball foul, not the sound of incidental contact in a physical game, but the specific sound of someone being knocked to the ground intentionally by another person. The arena did not immediately explode. It froze, the specific freeze of a crowd that is processing whether what it just witnessed was actually what it appeared to be. Then the explosion came. Some fans in shock, hands over mouths, others immediately on their feet with a fury that went beyond sports. The referees blew the whistle, gathered, and reviewed the play. It was called a foul. Flagrant foul discussion immediately surrounded it. Carter walked back toward the Chicago bench with the body language of someone who had done exactly what she intended to do and was not in the business of apologizing for it. On the bench, Angel Reese was watching. The camera found her. The image of Reese's reaction in that moment, the expression, the body language, became its own separate discussion that ran parallel to the discussion about the foul for days afterward. What Carter did, breaking it down. To understand the full weight of what happened, it needs to be understood in context. Caitlin Clark was the #1 overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft. She had arrived in the league carrying the weight of the most significant individual impact on women's basketball viewership in the sport's history. Her college games, particularly the Iowa-LSU rivalry with Reese, had produced television ratings that the sport had not previously approached. The Indiana Fever's home games with Clark on the roster were sellouts. Road games were effectively home games for a traveling fan base that had grown around her specifically. The WNBA's commercial trajectory had shifted measurably because of her presence. She was also a rookie, 22 years old, in her first professional season, operating at the center of a cultural conversation that had no precedent in women's basketball, being scrutinized on every play, playing through a physical adjustment that every first-year player faces in the professional game, except that for Clark, the physical adjustment was being applied with a specific intention that went beyond competitive basketball. Carter's shove was the most explicit expression of that intention. It was not a hard foul designed to prevent a basket. It was not physical defense in a contested area. It was a message, delivered with full force, with both hands, against a player who did not have the ball, with no gameplay justification of any kind. It said, "You are not welcome here. You are not going to have an easy night, and we are going to make you feel that." The flagrant foul conversation that surrounded the immediate aftermath was correct. The referees who reviewed the play and assessed it accordingly were correct. What was also true was that the play, in its specific aggression and its specific target, represented something that went beyond one bad decision by one player in one game. It was the most visible moment in a pattern of physical targeting that Clark had been experiencing since her first professional appearance. The answer. Here is what Caitlin Clark did after Chennedy Carter knocked her to the floor in front of the national television audience. She got up, she walked to the free throw line, She bounced the ball. She shot it. She made it. No dramatic reaction, no confrontation, no performance of grievance for the cameras or the crowd or the social media audience that was already dissecting every frame of the footage. Just the free throw, made cleanly, in the next possession. Clark scored 11 points in the second half to that point, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. The physical targeting had produced not a diminished performance, but an elevated one, as if the aggression had compressed something in her competitive engine, and it was now running hotter than it had in the first half. Her passing became sharper, her drives more decisive, her defensive rotations crisper. One sequence in the fourth quarter crystallized it perfectly. Clark grabbed a defensive rebound and immediately pushed the pace. No hesitation, no reset, driving the fast break with the ball and distributing it at the exact moment the defense collapsed. The finish was scored. The play had taken approximately 4 seconds from defensive rebound to made basket, and it had required 3 correct decisions in real time at speed. She made all 3. Chicago kept pushing. Carter drained a 3. The lead held, but the sky would not go away. Then came the moment that encapsulated the defensive criticism that had followed Clark into the WNBA and her response to it simultaneously. With Indiana protecting a slim lead and Carter driving, Reese made clear contact with Clark underneath, a foul that would have been called in the vast majority of similar situations. The whistle did not come. The crowd reacted with a disbelief that built audibly through the arena. The game was being called inconsistently, and the inconsistency was not landing in Clark's favor. The frustration was legitimate. Clark's response was to keep playing and not let the officiating become the story of her night. That discipline, the ability to absorb unfair treatment in real time without allowing it to alter the quality or intensity of her play, is not a skill that every talented player possesses. Some elite players require a sense of fairness to operate at their highest level. The feeling of being treated unjustly disrupts their focus and diminishes their output. Clark appeared to operate differently. The unfairness seemed to fuel her rather than diminish her. The closing moments. The final 20 seconds arrived with Indiana clinging to a 2-point lead. Desperation registered on both benches. Chicago got the ball and drew a foul, their best remaining chance to tie and steal the win. The free throw went up. It missed. The arena exploded. Indiana scrambled for the ball, Clark receiving it with the clock running toward 0, launching it skyward as the final buzzer sounded. Indiana Fever 71, Chicago Sky 70. Their first home win of the 2024 season. The celebration was not contained. The emotion of a win that had required surviving everything Chicago could throw. The physical pressure, the shove, the inconsistent officiating, the Carter scoring bursts, the Reese presence inside, released in one collective exhale across the Indiana bench and into the stands. On the other side of the court, Chennedy Carter bowed her head. The player who had made herself the game's most discussed figure, with a shove that had no basketball justification and had failed to produce the desired result, stood silently while Indiana celebrated around her. The aftermath, Carter's silence, and then her words. Post-game, Carter was approached by reporters. She was asked about the foul, about Clark, about the shove. She refused to answer any questions about Clark. Not a brief deflection, not a measured non-answer that acknowledged the situation while declining to elaborate. A complete, deliberate refusal. She walked away from the microphone. The press conference ended with the most discussed play of the game completely unaddressed by the player who made it. Later online, Carter broke her silence, not to explain or contextualize what had happened, to throw shade at Clark's game, questioning publicly what Clark brought to the table beyond three-point shooting. The move was strategically bewildering. Carter had already lost the on-court argument. Clark had scored, assisted, rebounded, and led Indiana to a win, despite being physically targeted throughout. Moving the argument online and inviting comparison was simply a second arena in which the result was going to be the same. The foul was officially ruled a flagrant one. The designation confirmed what the footage had shown, contact that went beyond the acceptable limits of physical basketball and that targeted a player not in possession of the ball. It carried no immediate suspension, but added to a ledger that the league would be watching. Clark's response to the entire situation was delivered without drama. She talked about growing up playing basketball with her brothers, physical, competitive games that had accustomed her to contact that other players might find destabilizing. She described the game as what it was, physical and feisty, something she was comfortable navigating. She said nothing about Carter specifically. She did not take the online bait. The contrast between the two players' post-game conduct was as revealing as anything that had happened during the 40 minutes on the court. What Reese said and what it meant. Angel Reese did not speak to media after the game. The WNBA fined her for the violation of media availability policy, a fine that was less significant as a financial matter than as a confirmation of her calculation that no good answer was available if she stayed to answer questions. Her presence throughout the game had been significant. 13 rebounds, a dominant interior performance that genuinely contributed to Chicago's ability to stay in the game against a superior Fever unit. Her physicality inside was real and effective in the basketball sense. The foul on Clark that went uncalled was a different category of action, contact designed to unsettle rather than to compete for the ball, and the absence of a whistle generated the frustration that it generated. The Reese-Clark dynamic heading into this game was already the most discussed individual rivalry in women's basketball. The 2023 championship ring finger taunt was still fresh in the memory of every person in the building. What the June 1st game added to that rivalry was its most explicit act of physical hostility, not from Reese herself but from her teammate, in a game where Reese's presence and energy on the Chicago bench was visible in every frame of the broadcast. The narrative of the two players and their relationship to each other took on a new dimension after this game that neither Clark's stat line nor Carter's post-game silence nor Reese's fine could fully contain. It had moved beyond rivalry and into territory that the WNBA's institutional leadership would need to address explicitly. Clark's numbers and what they proved. Step back from the drama and look at what Clark produced in a game specifically designed to prevent her from producing it. 11 points in the second half alone, 8 rebounds, a number more consistent with a forward than a point guard, reflecting the specific chaos of the game and Clark's willingness to go into traffic for possessions. 6 assists, the playmaking contribution that had been her signature from the first quarter, and the composure throughout that was never shaken by anything Carter or the Sky deployed. The game had been designed as a statement. The statement it produced was not the intended one. Instead of demonstrating that Clark could be rattled, intimidated, or diminished by physical aggression, it demonstrated the opposite. The harder the game got, the better Clark played. The more physical the contact, the sharper her decisions became. The more clearly the officiating failed her, the more she absorbed it and directed her energy back into the game rather than into grievance. Coach Christy Sides called Carter's foul unacceptable. She was right, and she said so without hedging. The Indiana organization's response to what had happened, making the institutional position clear, not letting it pass as a basketball play, was a measured and correct expression of what the moment required. Clark's response was different, quieter, more complete. She did not need to say that Carter's approach was unacceptable because the scoreboard had already said it for her. Indiana 71, Chicago 70. The bully had shoved her. The bully had lost. What the league heard. The WNBA's response to the game, the flagrant foul designation, the fine on Reese, was the minimum institutional acknowledgement of what had happened. Whether it was sufficient is a question that the subsequent season's worth of physical targeting of Clark and eventually answered in the negative, producing a more explicit league commitment to consistent officiating standards that Clark herself acknowledged as progress. But the June 1st game was the original text, the first clear, nationally witnessed, unmistakably deliberate act of physical aggression against the most visible player in women's basketball. It set a template for what other teams observed was tolerable and what the consequences looked like, which was not enough of a deterrent. That is the larger failure the game exposed, one that exists beyond Carter or Reese or this specific matchup and belongs to the league's institutional management of its own stated commitment to protecting its players. What the game produced on the court in Clark's performance and in Indiana's win does not erase that larger failure. The failure and the triumph coexist. Both are part of the true record of June 1st, 2024. The final image. Caitlin Clark throwing the ball into the air as the buzzer sounds. The crowd exploding around her. The Fever's first home win. The scoreboard reading 71-70. Somewhere across the court, Chennedy Carter with her head down. A player who had arrived at this game wanting to send a message, who had sent the clearest possible version of it with both hands against a defenseless opponent, and who had watched the intended recipient of that message respond by leading her team to a one-point victory. Carter bullied Caitlin Clark. Clark scored 11 second-half points, distributed 6 assists, pulled down 8 rebounds, made her free throws, refused to let the officiating failures alter her performance, and won the game. The bullying produced the opposite of its intended effect. It produced the clearest possible illustration of why the approach was doomed from the moment it was conceived. Because the specific quality that makes Clark the player she is, the competitive durability under pressure, the ability to convert adversity into fuel rather than losing energy to it, meant that the harder Carter pushed, the more Clark would answer. You do not rattle someone who does not rattle. You do not diminish someone who converts your aggression into her ammunition. You do not win by hitting someone who gets back up every time. Carter shoved Clark to the floor. Clark got up. Clark won the game. That is the whole story. And it was told completely in 40 minutes of basketball in a way that no amount of post-game silence or online shade could rewrite.